All right. Good. Hello to every single person who's joined us. Welcome to what promises to be a really exciting webinar. We are looking forward to really lively discussion. And without further ado,
All
I'm
right.
going to
Good. Hello to every single person who's joined us.
get us
Welcome
started. Oh,
to
wait, do you hear
what
that?
promises to be a really exciting webinar. We are looking
Okay, so this is reality television. Apparently, you can't go live and record and have it open in your browser. I'm going to get this one day, but not today. So, back to where I was saying, thank you for joining us for what promises to be a really exciting conversation and discussion. I am Terrell Strayhorn, uh, President CEO of Do Good Work Consulting. I also serve as Professor of Education and Psychology at Virginia Union University. And I'm joined today by my co-moderator, collaborator, and every now and again, a co-spirator in this good work. I'm going to let him introduce himself while I change my virtual background. Quinn?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this again. Like he said, a promising webinar. We have a distinguished panel here today to discuss what's important to us all, and that's students with disabilities and fostering a sense of belonging for them all in education spaces from kindergarten all the way to higher education. Um, uh, some quick housekeeping before we get started. We want you all to engage and participate as much as possible. So use digital reactions. You will see at the bottom of your screen, if I'm not mistaken, you have options such as thumbs up, clapping, and etc. So if you hear the spirit when they're talking or they give you a nice gem, please let them know through a digital reaction. You also can use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen as well. You can type your message in the chat box and hit send. You also have the ability to chat with others. So again, if you hear something that resonates with you or registers with you, let them know to keep going. We all like a few amens every now and again to cheer us on.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started with our introductions of our panelists. And we have with us today several panelists who will all come in their own way. Jaquin's going to kick us off introducing a couple, and then I'll come up and introduce a few more, and then we'll get into our first moderated question. Throughout the session, not only can you use digital reactions, if you look at the bottom of your screen, see, someone's already, oh, okay, thank you for letting us know. You can look at the bottom of the screen and you can use the Q&A function to raise a question for our panelist, and we encourage you to do so. So Jaquin will kick us off with some introductions. I'll come back and finish up the rest. I'm going to also activate the chat. Thank you for that note in the Q&A. Go right ahead, Jaquin.
So first, we have Dr. Antonio Ellis. He is a senior professorial lecturer and director of the Institute on Education Equity and Justice at the American University School of Education. Research interests include social equity, pastoral care, educational leadership, and special education, just to name a few. Next, we have Dr. Grace Thomas, an associate professor in music therapy at the University of Melbourne. Grace has lived experience of disability and has worked with disabled children and young people within the early childhood and special education sectors. Her research focuses on how music therapy can foster relationships and social connection through engaging and accessible music making. And the last one that I will introduce is Dr. Maximus Sefotto, a full professor in the Department of Educational Psychology at the University of Johannesburg, author of Philosophy in Education, African Perspectives, and over a dozen peer-reviewed journal articles. Sefotto promotes critical consideration of career transitioning for neurodiverse people from home through school and into the world of work.
Thanks, Jaquin. And I have the pleasure of introducing two more of our panelists. One, Vicki Van Heijs. who is the ADA 504 Coordinator and Deputy Title IX Coordinator for Accessibility at Harrisburg Area Community College, Central Pennsylvania's Community College. Assistant Vice President for Holistic Support and Engagement. She oversees 5 departments focused on removing barriers to education. And with over 20 years of experience in higher education, Van Heist advocates for equal access for students with disabilities, and she's particularly interested in the intersectionality of disability. I can attest to that. I've co-presented with her. She's dynamic, how identities, cultures, and communities influence its understanding and support in academic settings. And listen, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Drop things in the chat. The chat is alive. It is open and well. Please let us know where you're tuning in from. Whenever you have a global panel like this, there is no perfect time that works for every single one of us across the globe. Our final panelist may be able to join us is Dr. Oliver Mutenga. He's an experienced researcher with demonstrated history of exploring disability, education, and health issues. Mutenga earned a PhD in developmental studies from the University of Free State in South Africa. He's assistant professor at the Graduate School of Education and a research associate at the University of South Africa's College of Education. Oliver has been honored with a number of awards, like all of our panelists, including the Marie Curie Postdoctoral Fellowship at the University of Oslo, Norway, and the Global Challenges Research Fellowship at the University College London's Institute of Education. In the spirit of transparency, it is 3 a.m. where Dr. Mutenga's tuning in from. So, his alarm clock probably hasn't gone off yet, but when he joins us, we want to give him a thunderous of applause. All of our panelists, if you will help us join us, use your digital actions or the chat. We're looking forward to today's conversation. Welcome to each and every one of our panelists. Thank you for being here. Now, without further ado, let's jump into these questions. Number one, from your perspective and research, how would you define sense of belonging? And why is it particularly significant for disabled students at all levels of education? And I'm going to go right to my right to kick us off, Grace Thompson from the University of Melbourne.
Thank you so much, Terrell. Hello, everybody. Yes, I'm from Australia, so I hope you're going to cope with my Aussie accent today while we're speaking, but I'll do my best to speak slowly. This is such an important topic, belonging. And yes, I am a person with disability myself. I grew up disabled. I was a disabled child, a very visibly disabled child. And so this concept of belonging, I've really been dealing with my whole life, I guess. So just to folks out there, I'm going to use identity first language to say disabled people. And that's important for me because it's central to who I am as a person. Just like I say, I'm not a person with womanness, I'm a woman. I don't say I'm a person with a disability. So for me, belonging is having people around you who feel like they get you, who appreciate you. It's nothing worse than feeling ignored and left out. And being ignored and left out can happen really overtly, but also subtly and covertly. So that exclusion is another form of bullying, really. So that feeling that, oh yeah, there's people here that understand who I am is super important. And of course, the disabled community is a really highly varied community. Lots of different people, lots of different conditions, lots of different situations. And so as a disabled person, it's actually quite rare for me to meet someone who's had a really similar experience to me. There's so much diversity out there. So what we're understanding, I think, from the research is that visibility and awareness is really important. And that's what helps to foster pride and celebrating who you are. And when we have that sense of pride and celebrating who we are, for me, that's really that feeling of I belong here. People understand me. Yeah, so I hope that helps to tell you a bit about me too, to get us started.
Absolutely. Thank you, Grace. I'm going to tag in Maximus if you want to weigh in on this question.
Thanks so much. I'd just like to also piggyback on what the colleague has said, in that the question is about how do we define, how do we describe? And for us, looking at the fact that we will be talking about mainly the students, What we do, we approach it from the point of view of Ubuntu, which in essence says we are all human. And as human beings, we do not want to discriminate because this one is that way, is different. But we are saying, let's accept, let's be communal, let's be people who consider one another as human beings. Thank you.
Awesome. And I'm going to read Dr. Antonio Ellis's prepared remarks. I'm going to read them just as they're written. Jaquin's going to share them with you in the chat as well. And he writes, first, thank you, Dr. Strayhorn, for inviting me to participate in this 16 panel. It's important to note that the audience is witnessing a live display of what inclusion and belongingness look like in real time for me. As a person with a stuttering disability, having a human scribe or spokesperson read my comments aloud is not just an accommodation. It is a demonstration of how accessibility fosters full participation, allowing me opportunities to have my voice heard audibly as opposed to just through my written publications. All too often, inclusion is treated as some abstract concept, but today we see how intentional practices create spaces where diverse voices are valued and heard. True belonging is not about merely being present. It is about being actively included in ways that honor each person's differing abilities, identities, and lived experiences. For me, a sense of belonging refers to the feeling of being accepted, valued, and included within a community, institution, or an environment. It is the psychological experience of connection and membership where individuals feel recognized, respected, and supported in their identities. Where in education, sense of belonging is not merely about being present in a space, but also about experiencing meaningful inclusion, engagement, and affirmation. Research in educational psychology and disability studies highlights that when students feel a strong sense of belonging, they demonstrate greater academic motivation, self-efficacy, and overall well-being. For disabled students, a true sense of belonging extends beyond physical access. It requires a cultural and institutional commitment to inclusivity, equity, and the dismantling of ableist barriers. Vicky, do you want to weigh in on this question before we go on?
Absolutely. So as an advocate, but also somebody also with a disability, a learning disability, I have dyscalculia. For folks in the United States, I had an IEP from first grade on all the way through, right? So I think it's really important that we understand that when we're talking about belonging in educational spaces, that we have to automatically assume that folks who learn and engage differently already feel excluded, because you're already tapping into an area that they may not feel strong or good about themselves. So we've got to be so cognizant of that, and we must always be asking ourselves, have I considered the full range of access needs be built into the environment and the experience? And in this world, we need to be mindful of accessibility barriers that they continue here in the United States. We can continue to confront those challenges, but it's not only physical, but virtual environments too. So much learning has gone virtual, which is a benefit and can have tremendous accessibility if we are thoughtful to make sure, because we need to, when we don't have that built in, we are telling folks you do not belong.
Thank you, Vicky. As you all have said, and I want to add to it as well, is that sense of belonging, I think Professor Maximus said, is that we are all human, and sense of belonging is a basic human need. It cannot be forced. It has to be facilitated and fostered. So the second question for the panel is, in your own words, what are some of the key differences you've observed in the needs and experiences of disabled students? How can educators, advocates, and institutions move away from one-size-fits-all approaches to support their success? And well, Vicky, we'll start with you.
Great. So I think we need to recognize that ableism exists both overtly and covertly in education, and it is deeply embedded in the systems and the structures that shape it. And these systems reinforce the idea that accommodations and accessibilities are difficult or burdensome, right? So we've got to first begin to understand that we're working structurally in spaces that uphold the isms that we are working to dismantle. I tend to find that education sadly becomes more punitive rather than a space for joy and liberation. Learning should be fun and it should be a means of improving ourselves, right? But if we are so focused on making sure that things are coming in perfect ways, we lose that. And I think this system harms everybody. It constrains educators, scholars, practitioners, but then it oppresses our students who differ from those who are in the mean, right? That medium group. And I often find that rigor is frequently mistaken for control. So deadlines, I think, become a really strong barrier. And yes, there is purpose for a deadline, both in education and in the workplace, but they're often framed as necessary for maintaining rigor. And I think when we really unpack this, it's around control. Deadlines are around control and the ability to absorb knowledge, process it, synthesize it, and output it varies widely among individuals and in many, many ways, especially within the vast diversity of the disability community. So just because I'm not, it's not that I am incapable of doing something, but rather the enforced time frame restricts and creates a barrier. And I think that this is really dangerous. And so that's one of the things that I think we can begin to think more broadly and widely about. What is this deadline and what is it serving to do? Because is it really around rigor and education, or is it seeking to do something different? Thank you.
Well done, Vicky. Taking me to church, ma'am. You know, we often say with Terrell is that it's not that students with disabilities are incapable. Sometimes the environment disables them, and we have to create the conditions to foster inclusivity when we work with students with disability. Next, Grace, do you have any thoughts on the question?
Yeah, oh my gosh, we're all going to be best friends after this webinar because you can feel we've all had so much thought about it. Yeah, I want to extend that and talk about pride. You know, we're really familiar with other minority groups, you know, having a sense of pride in who they are, gay pride, cultural pride, Black pride. But unfortunately, a lot of societies still view disability as a tragedy. And so the notion of having disability pride feels awkward to so many people, and that we've got to change that. And I think, you know, the next thing I want to say is a bit hard, that, you know, as educators, we really have to question our beliefs about disability and whether we have discriminatory beliefs about disability. You know, that's a hard thing to examine, right? So in the classroom, we wouldn't tolerate racism, we wouldn't tolerate sexism, we wouldn't tolerate homophobia, yet we do tolerate ableism. We actually make our disabled students feel like they're not good enough a lot of the time. And as Vicky said, like they're a burden to have requirements to assist their learning. So this is something I think as a teacher that is really hard, because I'm a person too, and I can be discriminatory. I can be discriminated and I can discriminate against others. It's a really hard truth to sit with, and something that I've really had to face. And I just want to shout out to my students who have taught me so much and who have had the courage to come and say to me, hey, Grace, what you did just then wasn't very inclusive. And our willingness to keep learning as educators, we've got to create that space for disabled people to actually tell us and show us what's going on for them and for us to listen to it.
Yes, Grace. One thing I picked up right there is that students with disabilities are not a burden. You know, we all have needs. And some of those students that we work with a disability have unique needs that as we're recruiting them to our institution, we tell them that we have the resources and the support they need to be successful. So when they get on campus, we must do that work and fulfill our promises. Dr. Maximus, any thoughts?
I have had an experience of inclusion, of support, of how we can promote and mainstream issues of disability through 3 types of centers of excellence. This will be the first one, the Center for Visual Impairment Studies. It started in 2020, and now I think the first cohort graduated last year around October. The second one has been in the space for quite a long time, is the Center for Deaf Studies. And that also helps in answer to what we are saying. And the last born is the center that I'm leading, the Center for Neurodiversity. And this is where now issues of inclusion, issues of encouraging students become very, very crucial. If we had time, one could share a couple of stories here and there, but central to that is really the recognition of the identity of each one of them, and also allowing the space of how they learn so that they are supported in the ways they learn. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm gonna kick it over to Terrell.
Awesome. Before we go to the next question, let me offer up Dr. Ellis's voice on this particular question. As a person with a stuttering disability, my lived experiences have profoundly shaped my understanding of the unique and varied needs of disabled students. One of the key differences I've observed is that disability is not a monolith. Students with disabilities have diverse experiences that are influenced by specific impairments, intersecting identities, and the environments they navigate. For students who stutter, for example, the primary barrier is often not the speech disfluency itself, but the societal attitudes, ableism, and structural barriers that create fear, shame, and self-doubt. Many disabled students, particularly those with non-apparent disabilities, struggle with the pressure to mask their disabilities to fit into traditional educational spaces that prioritize fluency, efficiency, and conformity. In contrast, students with physical disabilities may face challenges related to mobility and access, while students with learning disabilities often require differential instructional strategies to succeed. Recognizing these distinctions is critical to fostering environments that affirm rather than marginalize disabled students. I picked up so much. I agree with Grace and others. We're going to all be besties. I mean, I got space. Come on, move in. We can all find a place to find a pad and live together and write about these issues. But what I hear across so many of our speakers are common themes around, and I, so appreciate it. Dr. Thompson or Grace, Jaquin and I really needed this panel, just about a week ago. We were working on a co-authored journal article where we put in the footnote, we were trying to problematize this idea of what people call people first, identity first language. And, in our work with students living with disabilities and disabled students, we literally have had students who said, exactly like you said, I'm comfortable with a disabled student. And, I hear it in your comment, and we heard it just now in Dr. Ellis's spoken word, this sense of, this pushing back against this and resisting the sense of shame and developing pride in oneself. And if part of self is this varying ability or disability, you embrace it. So we were put it in the footnote that throughout the paper, we were going to, sort of tango between identity first, and person first. And by the way, I don't know why we've gone this long separating those two, right? Identity first and person first. The person is constituted by identities. So we didn't split hairs, but anyway, the reviewer told us, no, you have to say it this way because that's the standard practice, which is exactly what we were pushing again. Now that's my sort of manifestation of their voice. We didn't hear it, but that's what I think they sound like. And the reason why I think we have to have more panels like this is so that we can create educational spaces where we're really, creating more spaces of pride and inclusion and not just talking at the sort of general public, but even to ourselves as educators, to own our own bias, own our own stuff, and to stay open to questions that we might get from our peers and from our students and from panels like these. And as you know, Maya Angelou, but my grandma said, I think before her, that is, when you know better, you do better. And so now that we know better, we're striving to do better across institutions. The last thing I'll say before going to the next question is, I think many of our panelists, and certainly appreciate Dr. Ellis's voice on this matter, is that it's not just about what we do at an individual level, but that we must also create more structural changes that foster inclusion and belonging for students. That institutions must also move away from, and I'm mindful of this in my own class, especially now that I do the work in this space. But, if I'm not careful, I privilege students who have the answer quickly, because I only got, whatever amount of time that, here's the question. And if you fire off the answers, okay, great, we're going to move on. But some students need longer to process, to think. I'm going to steal a little bit of Dr. Ellis's thunder. It'll come later in his prepared remarks, but we have to also create multiple opportunities for students to plug into classes, whether you're teaching in person or online. As we're modeling today, using the chat and allowing students to write and reflect and speak audibly and orally, all of this is important. It just affirms everything that our panelists have said. Listen, friends, we will have time to come back to some questions a little bit later, but it is not too late for you to use the Q&A function to park a question for our panelists. Use the chat or the digital reaction. I personally enjoy a holler back audience. But our third question is, the research evidence is clear. Offering specific examples of supports or interventions, such as positive relationships with faculty and staff, the use of artificial intelligence, and even creative practices, which sits at the heart of, I know, Grace's work in music therapy. Evidence is clear that these interventions have been found to be particularly helpful for fostering belonging and enabling the success of disabled students. At this point, several of our expert panelists will now tell us more about their given particular subject matter or what they've seen in practice that works. And I'm going to kick off with Dr. Maximus, if you want to weigh in on this question.
Thank you so much. Yes, this is a very interesting but complex issue, in that how then do we answer? Do we include in a way? We have started a group of fathers of children with neurodiversity, this to support the students. And while we were giving talks in there, a specialist in, a dentist came along and said, I'm going to support your students and I'm going to do it for free. And he's doing that not only to take care of the dental health, but to go across and look at, neurodiversity issues, health issues, whatever issues they can be. This has brought a lot of support around, and we're having different specialists who come along and say, I want to support this way, I want to support that way. And we find that you alluded to the issue of use of technology earlier. We have WhatsApp groups. I know that WhatsApp is not very popular in the US, but this part of the world in South Africa is very strong, and it allows people space to talk about their challenges and allow the space for people to express, to support, to guide, and to share important information that others would need from them. Thank you so much.
Awesome, thank you. Vicky?
Thank you. So, the bulk of my work has been working one-on-one with students to really help them develop that pride that Grace was speaking to, and that ability and the ways to find means to do self-advocacy. But I feel strongly that it's positive relationships and building that level of trust with students that we can really begin to challenge the myths of meritocracy and perfection that is laden within education, and everybody comes forward thinking, my goodness, I gotta really perform. I think that we need to recognize that part of the education needs to be a space that embraces creativity. I think we've lost that in a lot of ways, and accessibility and living and learning with a disability at its core is an act of creativity, because you are constantly trying to think, how do I circumvent this barrier, this system that was not designed for me, not ready to receive me, right? And as educators, researchers, and practitioners, much like Grace said, we need to set aside our egos, and we need to elevate the solutions that many of our disabled students already have to offer. Yes, we must set it up and prepare to receive them so that they can fully attend, participate, and demonstrate their knowledge. But then we also need to be able to humble ourselves to say, okay, this is how I've done it. Tell me another way that might be better for you, right? Because they can show us the way. And they continue to amaze me daily. So it's what's so energizing about the work. Thank you.
Awesome. And Grace?
I'm so happy because I get to talk about early childhood right now, which I don't get to do very often in my university higher education job unless I'm training our music therapy students. So fostering pride, trying to celebrate diversity. What a better place to do it than early childhood? And how important is that to create the foundations for a society? So part of my research was about going into preschool. In Australia, we call them kindergarten settings. And as the music therapist, I was there to see the disabled child, okay? So I was going to the kindergarten to work with the disabled child. But the disabled child is being excluded from a whole bunch of classroom activities. So I had this chat to the teacher and we flipped it. I wrote a song about different ways that you can talk, talking with your gestures, talking with your body, talking with your hands, talking with your face. And the whole kindergarten learnt this song about the different ways that we can talk, not just the child with a certain condition, not just the disabled child. So the whole kindergarten is learning, oh, I can say yes with my head. I can say goodbye with my hands. And then there are some hand signs, like in Australia, we would say, I'm finished, or I want more. And the whole kindergarten would be learning these signs and these gestures. And it was fun. I think, just to come back to Vicky's comment about fun and creativity, every kid wanted to learn this song. It wasn't about singling out the disabled child and fixing them, but really looking at the attitudes and the understanding and the compassion for everybody in that classroom. I loved that work. And I think that music is really special in this way because we can design learning activities that lots of different people with lots of different abilities can join in with. So for me, that links to the theory of universal design, where it's our job as educators to just think about, how do we get more people in on this activity? And I think that that's at the heart of this type of sense of belonging. Thanks for letting me share that.
Absolutely. I'm feeling like you. I think I'll jump on that. I don't know if I get to speak to early childhood, but certainly on this whole principle of sense of belonging and the heart and the feelings and the emotive part of it. Dr. Ellis writes, culturally responsive interventions are essential for fostering belonging and enabling success of disabled students as they recognize the intersection of disability, identity, and lived experience. Traditional interventions often focus solely on medical or deficit-based models of support, failing to truly consider cultural, linguistic, socio-emotional, you just heard it in Dr. Grace's comments, context in which students develop and learn. For example, for Black and Brown disabled students, fostering a sense of belonging requires acknowledging the compounded effects of racial and disability-based marginalization. Look at all those nods in the chat and the screen. Okay, positive relationships with educators and mentors who share or affirm their cultural and disability identities can be transformative, a major turning point. When educators validate students' backgrounds and communication styles, including those of students who stutter or have non-apparent disabilities, they create learning environments where students feel seen and heard and empowered. The integration of culturally responsive technology such as AI also makes a difference. It can further support belonging when implemented thoughtfully. AI communication supports, if you haven't thought about it, for students who stutter or have other speech-related disabilities can be effective, but it must be designed with an understanding of diverse speech patterns, right, to avoid reinforcing those ableist biases. Similarly, AI can be leveraged to create personalized learning experiences that adapt to student strengths rather than imposing rigid, standardized expectation. These tools must be used in tandem with human-centered approaches that really prioritize students' voices and agency. When AI is developed with this cultural responsiveness in mind, take into account linguistic diversity, disability, justice principles, and student autonomy, it can be a powerful tool for inclusion rather than a reinforcement of exclusionary practices. The full response is in the chat, but I appreciate so much the blending together of not just pedagogical culturally responsive approaches, but blending in thoughts about technology that really meld well with the creative and cultural practices of like music therapy and the many other practices named by our panelists. I'm going to tag in Quinn to take question 4.
Yeah, before I go there though, I want to spend some time on, I formerly was an admissions counselor, and I want to share that, fostering a sense of belonging really starts during the admissions process. And there are many students, we collect so much data on students during that time, asking about their, their high school GPA and what they're involved in clubs and organizations, what they aspire to do when they get to college. Hey, guess what? Do you have a disability? But what do we do with that information? Many students, like, I think, I know it was Antonio's response because I read it earlier, but many students mask their disability because of the hurt and the harm that has happened in the past. And I'm going to share something that me and Terrell put in the book. It's called, like, a phrase is, disclosure without action is mere distraction. Why are we asking students to disclose if we're not going to do anything about it? So we can foster, a welcoming environment by taking this information that we have from the student and then sharing with them, hey, in order to receive accommodations, especially in the US, you must have appropriate documentation. I'm gonna walk you over to Vicky and have her speak to you about what do you need to receive the appropriate accommodations so you can be successful at our institution. If we're not going to do that, then let's stop. Okay, I'm gonna go there. Let's stop saying that we're student-centered. Let's stop saying that we are here for every student. Let's stop saying that if you're Black, brown, white, pink, tall, short, disability, you can thrive here, because that's not true. All right, now I'm going to question 4. I had to get that off my chest. Question 4 is, what can we learn from the approaches taken in different countries to promote accessibility, inclusion, and belonging for disabled students? And we hope that each speaker will take a minute or two to describe the context of their country and share what's being done to promote accessibility and belonging for disabled students. And let's go with Vicky. Can you start for us?
Happy to. And before, I just need to say you're been talking about admissions counselor when I talk to juniors and seniors in high school. So here in the United States, that's folks getting ready to go on to college. I will say to them, when you're on that college tour, if they do not point out where the accessibility office is, and that's not part of the tour, you better think twice about that institution. If it's not on the tour, that is not the school for you, because it needs to be talk about that just as much as you're talking about the great food that you all spend all these monies for, right? You know, or the very cool climbing rock you got around the way, or whatever it is, you need to talk about that just as much. So I had to get that off my chest. So thank you. But here in the United States, I think one of the things that has become very much a catchphrase is neurodiversity. And I am very excited about this because I do think it does have a normalizing effect. It's destigmatizing this idea that there are more than one ways that we process information, we think, we learn. And in my 20 years of doing this work in higher ed, the vast majority of students I've engaged with would fall into that category of neurodiversity, right? So there is something that is disrupting the cognitive process, right? Or they learn in a different way. And while I think this is really good, it also makes me a little nervous, right? And I think it kind of goes back to what Jaquin was saying, in the sense that, are we really doing what we say we're going to do? We put it in that beautiful brochure. It's splashed across the homepage of the webpage. But when the students really show up, are they really getting what we say? And my concern around the neurodiversity is that some folks that may not be well-intentioned in the academy may now begin to say, well, everybody's got it, so I don't know why I got to do anything special for anybody, right? This idea that they still don't need to layer in access to the learning, to the participation, by making sure accommodations are there and present. So thank you so much.
Well said, Vicky. Thank you. No, thank you. Maximus, would you like to share?
Yeah, thank you so much. Our context in South Africa is for many young people who are not in education, not in employment, not in training. The acronym NEET as it is. And we use the model that we stole from you guys from the USA in terms of career transitioning for youth with disabilities. And we try to link them with the world of work so that those people who can help in terms of accommodating them once they leave universities, then that is something that we think is working well. We are at the beginning of our journey, but this is why I think I like what Vicky is saying. Neurodiversity is the buzzword now, but what do we do at the end of the day for them to transition from home through school and into the world of work? And this is the space in which we are working currently. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Grace, any words?
Oh, so many words. So many words are possible in this. Like, you know, I think it's really tricky. It's weird being the age that I am. You know, like I went to university in the 1990s. So, you know, you didn't tell anybody you had a disability. You just kept that to yourself because no one really wanted to hear it. You know, and so when I think about that, and what happens in my classrooms in higher education and in early childhood and a whole bunch of other places, that's a good thing. You know, we do ask these questions now and we have some openness, but there's still glitches and there's still problems there. So I guess we always have to keep trying to develop these things. So it's a great thing that people are more aware of autism, neurodiversity, learning disability. It's wonderful that there's more awareness. That's great. That's step one. And now what's step two? So I think the thing is always asking that, what's next? What's coming next here? Is it enough? Are we doing enough? And to not just allow people to feel tired by it, you know. And I think that a lot of disabled advocates have been fighting this battle for a very long time and not having a lot of people listen to them. So now that we finally have perhaps the ear of society, we've got to really make sure as educators that we don't get tired of hearing it. And And I guess it is hard sometimes. There's not going to be an easy solution for every disabled student. And we've got to keep trying in that way. So also at the University of Melbourne, we have a project called the Neurodiversity Project. I think that's doing a lot of good, but getting to every teacher, every lecturer, every tutor, every subject, that's hard, but we've got to kind of keep going. And in Australia, we've got something called the National Disability Insurance Scheme, where we're actually actively trying to break away from the tragedy model of disability. And this funding is not about fixing the disabled person, but trying to say, okay, whatever therapy and services you're accessing, that has to be focused on your participation in the community, the way you can interact with family and friends, getting a job, improving your quality of life, rather than fixing your impairment. That's wonderful. It sounds fabulous on the website. The hard thing is getting people to really understand it. So I think meeting each other is so important, because we've got to keep our energies up to keep going one more step here. Yeah. Thanks, Terrell.
That's really good.
Oh, go ahead. I know. Go ahead. Go ahead.
That's really good. I think, one, it is important that we have awareness about the disabilities and the students that we serve with disabilities on our campus. And two, I think what I hear you say is like the training is very important, trying to get to all faculty and staff about what we do to support students in new ways we can help them succeed in school. But the word that you use is like tired. We hope that our faculty and staff don't get tired of us talking about students with disabilities. Let me tell you something. Let's be very clear. We cannot afford to be tired, because students deserve the resources and support. As I said earlier, if we're not student ready, then let's not recruit them. It's plain, because there is no need to have them come on our campus, pay thousands of dollars, go to school, and then end up not completing their college degree. Now they're just in debt. And especially when we get on top of, okay, I would go there for you, Terrell, especially when we're talking about students with disability and students of color. Then let's tag on LGBTQ, put all those together. These are people that we push to the margins. And then we put them in a society without a college degree. Help me understand.
And then he goes on mute. Y'all saw that. It was like, drop the mic and then go on mute. That's what I'm talking about. That's my friend. But what I would also add to, let me just share, first of all, Dr. Ellis's voice on this matter. And then I would love to make a few observations, and then we will be at the point of transitioning to our Q&A. So that is just one more nudge to the audience. We got several great questions in the Q&A. We will get to them, all of them. So if you have a question or a topic that you want the panelists to speak to, please now go to the bottom of your screen and you can click on the button for Q&A, type your comment in there, and we will raise them. The other is, a couple folks had direct message about captions. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, depending on the version of Zoom you're using, you should see a button for closed captions. You can click on that to activate the captions. And the beautiful thing about it is you can select your language. So otherwise we have people from all over. All right, so this question about what can we learn from the approaches taken in different countries? Professor Ellis writes this: in the United States, accessibility and inclusion for disabled students has been shaped by landmark legislation, such as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, and the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. These policies have established critical protections, mandating individualized education plans or IEPs, accommodations, and anti-discrimination measures. However, while legal frameworks exist, implementation varies across our states, districts, and institutions, often leaving disabled students without the necessary support. Come back to that. With the current administration proposing to disband or dismantle the U.S. Department of Education, the future of federally mandated disabilities rights in education, let me reread that. With the current administration proposing to disband the U.S. Department of Education. The future of federally mandated disability rights in education is at risk. Without centralized oversight, enforcement of accessibility and inclusion policies could become even more inconsistent, exacerbating existing disparities. Looking to other countries, particularly those with strong national commitments to inclusive education, can offer valuable insights into how to sustain and enhance accessibility in the absence of a federal department. Did you hear what Dr. Ellis put down? That the US could actually look at somewhere else for pathways and examples and promising practices that we can use to ensure inclusion and accessibility for all. The potential dismantling of the U.S. Department of Education raises critical concerns for maintaining national standards for accessibility, equity, and belonging. There's so much I love about all that's been shared. Let me say this. One, I said it at a campus that will go unnamed in the moment just a few days ago. However, it was with Vicky, so I don't know. I probably just gave it away. But I need to say this because it's embedded in everyone's. Belonging is not a favor that we give to disabled students. I mean, lean in. It is a human right. It is a basic need. Whether you're tall or you're short, you're the fun size like me or the full size like, I don't know, somebody in my family probably. But listen, every single student wants to belong and they deserve the right to belong. Providing support, and here's where I'm talking about, accommodations. In the US, it's not a favor. It's not going above and beyond the call of duty. It is the duty. It's the law. Institutions must stop treating accessibility like some afterthought and make it the baseline, not the exception. It is what we owe them. It is what we promise them. Jaquin alluded to it. We've been places and interviewed students. We ask them all the time, why did you come to this institution? The student says, I came to this institution because they wanted me here. You ask students, now, how did you come to decide that the institution wants you here? Whether we're talking about the University of Melbourne, Virginia Union University, American University, University of Johannesburg, or HAC, or any other institution represented, when we ask students that question, they say, I know you wanted me here because you admitted me. Why would you admit someone you don't want? That is such a powerful statement for all of us across the globe to wrestle with. Why do we do it? Here's what we got to realize. All of our panelists said it. Our students who are living with disabilities and disabled students are not, at a deficit. They are not without strengths. They are not, incapable. We put this in the paper too that Jaquin was referring to, that, this idea of, somehow the comparison group for disabled students are non-disabled students. I think all of us, if we really take the concept of ability or disability very broadly, we're all a mix of abilities and disabilities. Tell y'all right now, I'm doing pretty well in this webinar. I can talk, but y'all don't want to see me on no basketball court. Not no more. My basketball days are over. I have no ability when it comes to basketball, but I do have ability when it comes to science and research. But I'm not as strong canoeing in the ocean. I've never even been in a canoe. So they're all of us have varying abilities. So here's the point, is that we've got to appreciate that our disabled students are actually experts. They are experts at something. They are experts at navigating educational environments that were not built for them, that don't provide them. They are some of the most resilient. I see nods on this screen. I don't know what's happening in the virtual audience. Throw up some claps, put it in the chat, listen to what you're thinking. But they are experts at navigating barriers that they didn't create. And then my final point is this. I think, Jaquin quoted what we put in the chapter, which is access or disclosure rather without action is a mere distraction. It's also true that, giving students access to our institutions is not equity. What's access without success is useless. What's the point of coming to any of our institutions if you're not going to graduate? Right? Access doesn't mean equity. There's more work if we're going to do the access piece, because here's the thing. A ramp into a building is useless. if the culture inside the building drives them out. I'm gonna say it again. A ramp into the building is useless if the culture inside the building is gonna send them right back on out. We've got to do the ramp building, but also the culture transformation and changing so that students who live with disabilities or disabled students feel included, they feel welcome, they feel valued, and they feel a sense of belonging. The science is so true. When they feel a sense of belonging, they go to class, they get good grades, they're retained, they graduate, and the list goes on. Now then, we have some questions in our Q&A for our audience. I'm gonna have the first, and then we'll volley it back and forth, Jaquin, if that's cool. One, how can we advocate and promote disability pride at a school who is often focused on advertising and sensitive about disability? Anyone want to take that first?
Yeah, I'll go.
Thank you.
I think even before we get to school, we must start in the homes. And from the homes, go to early childhood and promote activities that engender pride in our students so that, Olympics, games, music, whatever it is that they can do. I think you touched on one of the most important things that we have to emphasize, abilities. If we can benchmark on that and capitalize on the abilities that people with disabilities can have and show, then we have a way of starting. And I really strongly advocate that we start from home, early childhood, throughout school. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Anyone else want to weigh in on that? Grace, go right ahead.
Yeah, I'll give that a crack. I think that's really hard, the person who's asked this question, because they've added that part about that it's a school who's sensitive about disability, right? And this is really tricky. It's really, really tricky because also we don't want to put disabled students at more risk. If this is a risky, unsafe, discriminatory environment, we don't want to put those people at risk of that. So this is a really situation where you have to be really thoughtfully strategic about what you're going to do. And I would say the biggest thing that I've had to do is to be able to disclose my own disability in my workplace and in my classroom. And I have to say, it has taken me a lot of years. This is a very recent thing for me to be able to come to a webinar and say, hi, I'm a disabled person. That just did not happen in my life even 5 years ago. So I think that it's about your faculty as well. Your faculty as adults can take some of that responsibility, because if they can't do it, if the adults with disability don't feel safe to disclose their disability in the workplace, there is no way your student with disability is going to feel safe. And, it just becomes tokenism. So I think that there's some real soul searching to do at a school like that if you're already saying there's sensitivity about disability. So it's tough, but hey, that's what a webinar's for, to challenge our thinking on these things and how do we create the type of safety to celebrate disability. We have to be strategic about it.
Any others? See Vicky, and then I'll tag in
Yes.
Jaquin for the next.
Yes, I'll just add on to what my fellow panelists have already said, and I do agree that a lot of it does start in the home. So very often, when families bring home a new baby or a new child, and then as that child maybe came in straight off into the world with an apparent disability, or that has emerged over time, I think sometimes families, there's a grieving process that goes around, my goodness, this child is not going to manifest in the way that I had hoped and dreamed. And some families can reconcile with that really well, and others really struggle with it. And to the point where I have been in spaces where I am doing an intake for accommodations, and I will say, your documentation says that you have this diagnosis, and the student will turn to the parent and say, I have what? Because they never talked about what it was they had. So I think folks are so fearful of a label, but I'm here to tell you, you know, when you do something differently than the folks around you, you already know. So let's talk about what it is so that we can then talk about what it means, how it is manifesting within yourself, how you demonstrate it. And then the next thing is, what are those strategies that we're going to use to counteract, to counterbalance, right? But if we can't even talk about what it is that you have, if we can't call it by name, then we already have shut down that part of that student, and the shame has begun. And now it's going to take decades for that individual to be able to come and speak about what they need and be able to ask for the things they are so rightly deserving by just being on this earth, right? So I think there's a lot of that piece. And the other thing that I think we really need to be mindful of is talking just plainly that not everybody is going to do all the things the same way. And that is a good thing. And we need to celebrate that. And we get ourselves tripped up over variety. But yet we love variety in our food, or we love variety in our homes or in our cars or all those things. But when it comes to people and variety or diversity, my goodness, we really can shut down around that. So I would say, yes, that institution has a lot of work to do. But there's reasons for why that's permeating. And I often would say, disability isn't sexy, but it could be, right? So they want to put what's sexy out on their publications. Well, you can make disability be something that's eye-catching and exciting, and as a way to promote, as opposed to let's put all the broken people in the back, right? So hopefully, I champion whoever is trying to change that system. Good luck to you, and tap into those of us on the screen if we can be of support. Sorry, everyone, I just threw that out there to everybody, but I feel you would be okay with that.
Yeah, Vicky, I appreciate you sharing. You took some of the words right out of my mouth. To echo some of the things that you all are saying is, advocating and promoting disability pride at school involves creating an inclusive environment that values diversity, celebrates accomplishments, and fosters understanding. And I think from our research, my research with Terrell, is that we know that students with disability are involved in school. So we need to encourage them to take on leadership roles in school government, organizations, or events, because they can do it. We just have to create that environment and welcome them and invite them to those spaces, let them know that, we seek their leadership and their voice in the things that we do on our campus.
He's going off script, so I got to go off script one more second. If you're going to mention that study, so get ready. You can take the next Q&A. Listen, friends, folks, and the listening audience, and those who watch the live stream and the recording. Here's the other thing we got to stop doing, and you heard it in all of our panelists' comments, but let me just talk about how it shows up in practice. We are often feeling pressure to compare students with disabilities or disabled students to their peers without disabilities. And the problem with that comparison is, first of all, I feel like it's old. I mean, we've done that so long. There are a lot of things we've discovered from that, which actually doesn't always put the students with disabilities at the bottom. But when our question is framed in a way that doesn't allow them possibilities for success, of course, that's the outcome. When our methodologies are used and deployed and employed in ways that will always, sort of starts from the beginning with them at a deficit, it's going to put them at a deficit. So what we've been trying to say back through our writing as scholars, but we need to do it also in practice as policymakers, as decision makers, is, stop comparing these two groups. In one of our papers, we thought it'd be much more interesting to look at maybe students who identify as having one disability versus multiple disabilities, or looking at what are the campus experience differences between those with physical disabilities and those with auditory disabilities, right? So we could then see differences in the quality of their experience and then use that to then transform and reform our practice. So we just want to offer up that there are multiple ways to look at differences. And, you know, when you constantly use one group, and we had a reviewer who said something like, if you can't compare them to students who don't have disabilities, you have nothing to say. By insisting on that comparison, we keep one group, the standard, the norm by which all others are measured. And that in and of itself is inequitable, unjust, and unfair. Okay, take it away, Jaquin.
See, I'm not gonna bounce off what you just said, but ask the next question. Next question to the panel, not for Terrell and Jaquin, is even though there's noise on neurodivergence pride to support students, how can we start advocating and educating others for neurodivergent and disabled teachers to keep staying in the education sector to promote neuro allies, disability pride, and a safe space in the classroom? And I'll put that in the chat for you all as well. Anyone want to, well, if you need to read it first, you can. But does anyone want to answer first?
So
Yeah, can I go?
Oh, go ahead, Maximus.
No. Lady first. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. You're so kind. I think over my time in higher ed, both at 4-year and now currently at a community college, very often trying to get groups going around having a sense of pride of having a disability has been very, very difficult. And I think it speaks back again to the challenge of, well, we're all here to do this learning thing, and now you want me to come out and say that I learn differently, or I need different things to be able to access the learning. Like, you know, I just outed myself, and you know, I'm not comfortable with that. And so I think it just goes back to the heavy stigma that's there, which is why I think it's challenging for faculty or administrators or staff members to come forward and say, hey, you know, I need this because I learned differently. It's probably within the last 4 years that I really have begun people to really talk about that. So we have a lot of catching up to do versus other communities, LGBTQ+, women's centers, right? Or centers that are tapping into the Black experience or the Latinx experience, right? There's a very different thing, because for vast majority of individuals with disability, you can pass. You can mask it, you can disguise it for a little bit of time, maybe a long period of time, depending on how it's coming forward. So the danger of revealing that is really, really high. So I think that's some of the challenges and why it does not come through the way that folks are really hoping. So we can build those cross allyship, because I think that's really where the good stuff is. But I think those are the challenges ahead.
Thank you. We have two systems that we use. The first one is the university radio. We have a radio station in the university, and this is where people can come and have space to disclose, to express themselves, to talk about their pride, as well as educating the rest of everybody about their own condition, about their own disability. Apart from that, we have also a television series that runs from the university, and there people go and, you know, they have programs, they can talk about whatever. And we have seen that working wonders because we link also with the schools in the communities. The center that we run is in Soweto. You might know something about South Africa. And that's where the poorest of the poor live, the majority of them there. But we need to reach out to them as much as possible and invite them into the space to talk about their situation. Thank you so much.
Awesome, awesome. Grace, you have the last on this one, and then I'll wrap us up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit more, I guess, everyday responses. So inspiring hearing about Maximus's approach. I guess we need to do the maths. We know now that 1 in 5 people have a disability. So any room that you're in, do the maths. You know, there's going to be a disabled person in the room. And if someone chooses to tell you about their experience, I would say think of a follow-up question. Ask them another question. I can't tell you how many people I've disclosed to and they don't know what to say next. And they almost just walk away without saying anything. So get ready. When someone tells you they've got a disability, ask them another question to hear more and to be interested in their experience, because disabled people are everywhere.
I love it. There it is again. Another mic drop, mic drop, and leaves it alone. I appreciate it so much. Yes. Okay, let me do this as we wrap up. So Dr. Ellis has been generous and typed responses to many of the questions in the Q&A. You see that here, but on this particular one, he also must add that it is vitally important for K-12 schools and higher education institutions to be intentional, listen to this, about hiring teachers and professors and staff who have disabilities. I think the same way we argue for Black and Brown students having access to Black and Brown teachers, we should have the same intensity about disabled students having access to qualified disabled educators. I often tell people that I have never met or known of a Black male tenured professor in education with a stuttering disability. Therefore, for years, I had doubts of that I could ever achieve tenure. I can say much more about this, but I believe a lack of representation is a huge issue that negatively impacts the motivation level of disabled students. And I would protract it to say this, friends, the lack of representation disempowers, throws water on the aspirations, extinguishes the motivations of all students across these identities. We must be intense in our ruthless pursuit. And that doesn't mean we have to be unlawful, just doesn't mean we have to have intensity and creativity and commitment and passion to pursue representation the same way that we do across all of our identities. Thank you. Can you join me in celebrating all of our panelists? Come on, throw up some hearts, put it in the chat. Let them know you appreciate their time, their energy. You've got the chat open. Tell them thank you. Tell them what you get from it. Look at all those hearts. Oh my goodness. And while that's happening, certainly from Do Good Work and our colleagues at the University of Melbourne, Grace Thompson, that we co-partnered on this webinar. We want to thank each and every one of you for joining us for this global conversation. It doesn't stop here. We have another one coming up next month. Quinn's going to share something on the screen. Next month, February the 12th, we have a webinar, another global approach to look at, this time, sense of belonging in first-year experience, in the first year of university across the globe. And so we are bringing together a group of dynamic researchers, practitioner scholars, and the like, who will help us engage and embrace and address that topic. So please mark your calendars. If you are a person who put a question in the chat and you say, I want to hear the answer to my question, we've got good news for you. But to do it, you must follow us on social media. So go to social media, follow us at Do Good Work on all platforms. Do Good Work, find us. And what we're going to do is we're going to offer these questions to our panelists, and any written responses we will post on social media to the questions that remain. But what's a webinar without people? And what's a panel without an audience to listen? And so on behalf of the panelists and our teams, we want to thank you for carving out time in your day, morning, noon, after night, whatever it might be, to join us for this conversation. We hope that you will stay tuned and join us for the session on February 12th. It could be February 13th, depending on where you are in the world. But again, we have a colleague from the University of Melbourne, Dr. Claudia Rivera Munez, who will join us, and several other panelists from across the globe. Until that time, listen, friends, take care of yourself. Remember this: you matter just the way you are. You are enough. And no matter what people say, you're never too much. And earlier I had on the hoodie, but I had to change because I had to look more professional. Look at these great panelists. I had to match them. But we came to tell y'all that belonging doesn't start and end with our students. It also matters for you. You belong here. In the seat you're in the role you're in the job you're in, we need you. You have a seat at the table. So now that you're there, please use it. With that, this concludes our webinar. Take care of yourself until next time. Bye, friends.